Robert Downey Jr. is one of the most recognizable actors in the world. For more than a decade, millions of people knew him as Tony Stark, the billionaire genius, the sarcastic hero, the man inside the Iron Man suit. But before Robert Downey Jr. became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, his life looked very different. And before Marvel trusted him with one of the most important roles in modern movie history, his career had already come dangerously close to disappearing. His story isn't simply the story of an actor who became famous. It's the story of a young Hollywood talent who rose incredibly fast, then lost almost everything and eventually found a way back. But to understand the comeback, we have to go back to the beginning. Robert Downey Jr. was born on the 4th of April, 1965, in New York City. And Hollywood wasn't something he discovered later in life. It was part of his childhood. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was a filmmaker and actor. His mother, Elsie Downey, was also an actress. Robert grew up surrounded by movies, actors, cameras, scripts, and filmmaking. He even appeared in one of his father's films when he was only 5 years old. So, acting wasn't simply a career he decided to pursue, it was almost the language he grew up speaking. As a teenager, Downey continued acting and eventually moved toward a professional career. And Hollywood quickly noticed something unusual about him. He wasn't just another young actor. He had charisma, he had comic timing, he could be vulnerable, he could be unpredictable, and most importantly, he could completely disappear into a character. During the 1,980 seconds, he began appearing in movies and television projects and became associated with a generation of young actors who were transforming Hollywood. His talent was obvious, but his personal life was becoming increasingly complicated. By the 1,980 seconds, Robert Downey Jr. was becoming a recognizable young actor. He appeared in films such as Weird Science, Back to School, Less Than Zero, and other projects that helped establish his reputation. But one movie would change how Hollywood looked at him. That movie was Less Than Zero. Downey played Julian Wells, a young man struggling with drug addiction. It was a fictional character, but the performance was so convincing that it revealed just how powerful Downey could be as an actor. Hollywood had discovered something important. He could play complicated people, damaged people, funny people, brilliant people, people who were difficult to understand. And that range would eventually become one of his greatest strengths. But there was a darker reality developing behind the scenes. Downey had been exposed to drugs at a very young age. His father introduced him to marijuana when he was still a child. As he grew older, substance use became increasingly serious. And while his acting career continued moving forward, his personal problems were moving in the opposite direction. Then came the role that seemed destined to change everything, Charlie Chaplin. In 1992, Robert Downey Jr. starred as the legendary comedian and filmmaker in the movie Chaplin. It was an enormous challenge. Chaplin wasn't just a famous actor, he was one of the most recognizable figures in film history. Downey had to recreate his physical movements, his voice, his mannerisms, and his emotional complexity, and he delivered. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Suddenly, Robert Downey Jr. wasn't simply a talented young Hollywood actor. He was being recognized as one of the industry's best. At only 27 years old, he had reached a level of recognition that many actors spend their entire careers chasing. It looked like his future was almost unlimited. But while his professional life was reaching new heights, his personal struggles were becoming more dangerous. This is one of the most important parts of Downey's story, because from the outside, success should have solved everything. He had talent, he had money, he had major movie roles, he had critical recognition, he had an Oscar nomination. But addiction doesn't work like a business problem. Success doesn't automatically remove it. Fame doesn't automatically remove it. Money doesn't automatically remove it. And Robert Downey Jr.'s substance abuse continued. Throughout the 1,990 seconds, his problems became increasingly public. Hollywood began watching an extraordinary talent struggle in real time. And eventually, the consequences became impossible to ignore. By the middle of the 1,990 seconds, Downey's substance abuse had become severe. There were arrests, there were court appearances, there were rehabilitation attempts. There were periods when he tried to regain control, only to fall back into the same cycle. In 1996, he was arrested after police found drugs and a weapon in his vehicle. Later, while under the influence, he entered a neighbor's home and fell asleep. The situation became a national news story. His career was changing. Studios couldn't simply ignore what was happening. Movie insurance became a problem. Production schedules became a problem. Reliability became a problem. And the actor who had once seemed destined for Hollywood's highest level was becoming increasingly difficult for studios to trust. But perhaps the most painful part was that the talent never disappeared. The talent was still there. The problem was that the person behind the talent was struggling to control his life. This is where the story becomes especially important. Hollywood can forgive a lot, but Hollywood is also a business. Movies cost millions of dollars. Hundreds of people work on productions. Studios need actors to show up. Insurance companies need productions to be predictable. When an actor becomes unreliable, the financial risk can become enormous. Downey's behavior was making him increasingly difficult to insure and employ. And slowly, the opportunities began disappearing. The roles became smaller. The productions became more cautious. Eventually, some major opportunities disappeared entirely. At one point, the actor who had been nominated for an Academy Award was spending time in prison. His career had moved from award ceremonies to courtrooms, from Hollywood premieres to rehabilitation centers, and the distance between the two worlds seemed enormous. Then came another unexpected opportunity, the television series Ally McBeal. In 2000, Downey joined the cast and his performance was immediately praised. He won a Golden Globe for his role as Larry Paul. For a moment, it looked like the comeback had already begun. Hollywood was starting to believe in him again. He was working, he was receiving awards, and audiences were responding to him. But the recovery wasn't complete. The problems hadn't disappeared. And in 2001, Downey was arrested again. The situation became too much for the production. Ally McBeal eventually let him go. Once again, the opportunity disappeared. And this time, there was no guarantee another one would come. Imagine what that must have looked like from the outside. A man who had once been nominated for an Oscar, who had played Charlie Chaplin, who had been one of Hollywood's most exciting young actors, was now struggling to find stable work. The industry had reasons to doubt him, and audiences had reasons to doubt him. Most importantly, he had to confront himself. For years, the story had been about what Robert Downey Jr. could become. Now the question was whether he could simply rebuild his life. That was a much bigger challenge. And there was no guarantee of a Hollywood ending. There was no superhero waiting to save him. There was no Iron Man, not yet. Eventually, Downey began taking recovery more seriously. He continued working to rebuild his life. And slowly, the situation began to change. He started taking smaller roles. He began rebuilding relationships in Hollywood. He worked consistently. And perhaps most importantly, he began proving that he could be trusted again. But rebuilding a career after years of addiction wasn't going to happen overnight. Hollywood had a long memory. Studios remembered the missed productions, the arrests, the insurance problems, the uncertainty. So even when Downey was ready to move forward, the industry wasn't necessarily ready to forget the past. And then something happened that would become a major turning point. Someone in Hollywood decided to take a chance on him. That person was Mel Gibson. Robert Downey Jr.'s life had reached a strange place. He had already experienced enormous success. He had already lost almost everything. And now he was slowly rebuilding. But the biggest opportunity of his career was still ahead of him. At this point, nobody knew that a comic book character named Tony Stark would eventually transform his life. Nobody knew that Marvel would bet on an actor many people considered too risky. Nobody knew that a struggling Hollywood star would eventually become the face of the biggest movie franchise in the world. But before that happened, there was one more chapter. A chapter about second chances, a chapter about Mel Gibson, and a chapter about how Robert Downey Jr. slowly convinced Hollywood to believe in him again. This was the beginning of the comeback. And the biggest comeback of his career was still to come. Empire Lessons.